it's Lisa here. This week's video is a continuation from my very last one. So here we are with what I painted last week, and you will find that I've already made up 4 colours for my water background. I'm just going to leave it as normal daytime sunshine colours instead of having sunset or sunrise, purely because these are orangey browns, and then the opposite of orange on the colour wheel is blue, so blue-green water is going to really accent or emphasise these rocks. So I have French ultramarine blue, I have phthalo blue, I have phthalo green, and I have a turquoise colour here, which sometimes might be called viridian or aqua. And of course, what I'm going to have to do besides that is show some sort of reflection of colour of the rock itself into the water. I'm going to, you can see here I'm putting up some images of artworks that I've done before in different mediums, obviously acrylic and some watercolor, but you can see where I've just emphasized that concept of having these rocks, you know, in some cases just hovering above the water, and then it's really up to you how accurate, I guess, you are with the reflections, because it depends on how rough the surface of the water is, it depends on the height of the eye, and a lot of other things. I won't go into that too much because that's like a whole lesson in vertical 3-point perspective. We are slightly above looking down on them, and that, what I mean by perspective, is going to influence the severity of the shapes in the reflection. So I'm going to keep it quite simple for this one so that you can perhaps follow along, and later down the track we'll revisit this subject and go a little bit more in depth about it. So what I'm going to do today is purely just do a line that might be indicative of a bit of this colour coming down into the water. It's purely indicative because this is just going to be a nice suggestive watercolour. And then above that, I may allow room for a little bit of this colour. And then above that, maybe a little bit more. And we'll just leave it at something really simple like that, as long as I'm getting that reverse tapering from the pyramid shape here, reversed down. So first things first, what technique am I going to be using? Well, I am going to be using wet on wet mainly, purely because it makes me think of softness. I think of water. I do think of those colours infused in linear shapes, but for this instance, if I put too much sharp detail into the water, I'm going to lose the power of my subject. So be careful when you're painting things. If you remember, this is what I quickly blocked in last week. The reason why I kept this background really light and soft was because I wanted more interest to be in the rocks, in the shape and the colour and the perceived texture. So if I'd put more dynamic tones and contrast into the back and colour, it would have perhaps taken over. So that's not my wish here either. I really want these rocks to be the hero. When you're painting something, that's one of those little questions you can always ask yourself and remind yourself as you're working. Do I need to add more? Am I supporting my key element of subject, or am I competing with it? Okay, so I'm just using a large Roy Mac brush. I think it's, gosh, I don't know, 3/4 of an inch. And what I'm going to do is just wet the page. I've soaked the brush. It's not dripping, but it is heavily wet. And I'm leaving a little bit more white than I assume that I might want around there. And I'm actually going to avoid going inside that pencil line that I just made of my reflection. And I'm not being too worried or specific about down here at the moment. I'm going to start here, soft and blurry, and then work my way down. I do this because I don't want my hand at the end going over something that I've worked on in the middle. So I tend to work from the top of the page down. So as we go back, the water itself, doesn't matter what colour it is, it's more likely to soften and reflect sky. So I'm here with my French ultramarine blue, which, being an under mixer, I've already run out of. That's so me. And I'm using my brush, still my big brush, I'm using it in a flat way, wide widthways, but also vertically like a stiletto, and splitting it up a little bit. And I'm giving room for wet white paper to be filled in and starting to introduce phthalo blue, which is a much more vibrant blue. It's a much prettier blue, and it's a blue that our brains actually connect to the colour of water. Gosh, I'm adding the viridian now, or turquoise, and this is close to blue more than it's close to green. And the reason why I'm doing that is because I don't want a huge quick jump from back here to, into phthalo green or something really vibrantly green. I'm going to go into a medium-sized round brush now because I need a little bit of control. I still want to work wet on wet, but I don't want these blobs ending somewhere. And I want to be able to get a little bit of interesting shape like this, which I call lazy ellipses. They're like egg shapes, but you're squashing them down. And I might leave a little bit of a gap because what I can do then is step slowly into my phthalo green. Please check the paper still remains wet enough, because at any point if it dries, your marks are going to become very linear and hard, and that's just leading into issues of it looking a little bit less like gentle water, and it starts to become a little bit detailed, and your eye will be drawn to those firm, sharp, hard-edged lines. The only sharp, hard-edged lines that you want people to really dwell in are the ones of the rocks. So I'm not going to be perfect with these shapes. I might leave that there, but because this is an edge, I'm just going to run some clean water along it as a sand shoe position of my brush, and that's going to stop it from hardening up. I'm also aware that this might be drying out a little bit, so I'm going to re-wet this area here just to give me that little bit of time to add colour without panicking of forming a hard edge line. Really remember when you're doing watercolour what it is you love about it, and or if you don't know too much about it, some of the benefits that working with water can give you. And I think a lot of students forget it, a lot of beginners forget it, and a lot of people who've painted with watercolour for a little while have forget it, because you get, like, the beauty of painting is that you get caught up in things. You kind of stop thinking at some points. So the reason I love it, one of the reasons, is because the wetter the paper, the more time you have to play, pull colour out, add colour in, influence tone. And so it's a very good reminder when you're working with something like water to ensure that you're working with wet paper to get maximum benefit and effect. I want a little bit of contrast behind this lighter pebble here. And now I'm getting down here, I'm getting more on top of the water. This is more in front of me, whereas this back here was way back further towards the horizon. So down here I'm working with a drier paper. That's too dry. I still don't want, remember, I still don't want really formal hard edges if I can help it. But now I'm down the front, it's actually a benefit to leave a few little areas of really light colour like I've got here, or just wet paper, and you don't have any intention of filling that wet white paper in with any colour at all. I'm now just wetting around these earlier reflective shapes that I put in. Remember, these shapes are going to be tinted in the family of colours that the pebbles are, not the water, not the colour of the water. I was going to say the watercolour then, but that's a bit confusing. We're doing a watercolour of watercolour. So I'm still staying with the viridian, which is a nice marriage between phthalo blue and phthalo green. If you don't have that colour, by the way, it's a nice blend between these two colours. And I'm also being more careful around the edges of that reflection shape. As I said before, colour-wise, we're working with opposite colours here. Browns that come from reds and oranges literally start at the orange side of the colour wheel, and then we're going on to bluey greens, which is very much the other side. I've got a warm red here, or a deep orange if you like, of my Derwent Inktense palette, and to that I'm going to add the red oxide, and you can see that that's actually a nice little, quite a strong little colour. But if I put that straight on the water, it wouldn't carry any believability or make sense, because we don't see that colour. It would look separate. We don't see that colour separate from the water. It's going to be infused into the water. And what it basically is a reflection of this colour from the object that's influencing the water. So is it in the water? Yes. It's not sitting on top of the water. So I've got a little bit of the phthalo green in my brush. I'm just going to chuck that onto here and see what that does. A little bit more. And you see how the bluey green and the orangey reddish colour, well, they actually make brown. Opposites make brown, right? Tertiary, that's the tertiary example. So what I want to do is, I know if I add a little bit of the viridian or the phthalo green, not the blue, it's a bit too strong, but if I add one or two of these bluer greens into this mix, then I use that colour, that's going to be my best option. So what I might do first is, I just want to feel that paper. It's still quite cold, which means it's still holding a lot of moisture. I'm just going to go ahead anyway and wet this first area with a clean brush. And again, me being very particular here, it doesn't mean you have to be. It's just my nature to be, when I'm in teaching mode, to be realistic. So I'm adding a little bit of this viridian. Actually, that's probably too much. Look, I'm just going to throw that colour down here anyway to show you. You see how dull it is? But because it's got, in essence, it's got this colour in it, there's a connection to the water. It's not separate from the water. So now I'm adding back in more of the colour I made up, which was the burnt orange. And I'm actually okay with that. The one rule I would say to you is, don't let this reflective colour be prettier, that means more saturated and more vibrant, than the original colour of the rock. Now I'm actually sort of borderline pretty close, so I would not be wanting this to be any prettier than what it is, or more vibrant. And while I'm at it, this area right next to the bottom of the actual rock, it needs to be a lot darker. So what I'm going to do is, I'm just going to add a dark green, which has a bit of a bluish base. It's more like a forest green. And that, in essence, is a deeper version of the colour I mixed up before. If you have the Derwent Inktense palette, it's the third green in from the bottom. But before this really dries, you notice how quickly it's drying. It's giving me quite a hard edge already. That's okay, but you really don't want it to look separate to the brownie colour. You want it to look like it's a shadow, because what its job is making the brain think that there's something under there. It's like touching the water, but it's going right in underneath the edge of the rock as we see it, the pebble as we see it. So I'm just going to leave it like that for now. So I'm using my warm red. Oh, actually, thinking about that, I don't have to, because this colour is the next rock up. It's the reflection of the rock above. So it's really quite subtle, and it's more of a softer brown. So for this one, I'm going to use my Sennelier dark brown, which I'll show you is more of a Van Dyke or golden brown. Remember, a Van Dyke brown is a yellowy brown. So what I'm going to do to that is, I'm going to add the French ultramarine blue to it, and that's going to actually tone it down even more. That's what I'm looking for. And this is quite light, so I'm not going to do wet on wet, I'm going to do wet on dry, and this is not very wet. As you can see, I've mixed up a small amount. I'm literally just trying to add a colour, and see how it visually links to that? And then the one above that is literally the same, but it's just a bit deeper. So I'm going to hit into the brown a little bit more and maybe pick up a last little bit of that French ultramarine blue. And this one I'm just going to make it a little bit deeper. I want it to potentially be darker. Now that they're in there and they're really subtle, there's a few other little things I would do, but I definitely do it in this order because you need the light to be there before you can go down dark. So that's why I've kept this quite light and I've left white areas around it. So what I can do now is I can decide, we'll see this area here of the water's a little bit darker and it just stops where I've done the reflection. If I want to keep that very continuous and to look like it's all one surface, which it is, I need to influence that by adding more of that colour. So I've got French ultramarine blue and that brown. I'm going to add a tiny bit of water, but look how small the amount that I'm working with is. It's a tiny little amount. So don't dip your whole brush in. It's just a matter of having a little bit in. And then I can just add that to the same sort of area that dark was in. Re-wet this area and I'm just going to run the paint across it. Remember, no hard lines, I don't want any. So I need to wet my brush, clean off excess, rub off excess water on a cloth. Allow that. Now, the downside is if you go really strong like I have and you've got a soft colour underneath, it's really not going to show through that much. So what I would do to combat that is to just, while it's still wet, puddle in a little bit of that colour. And then it starts to look like it's connecting. I don't want to go too crazy with this because it was really just about adding the water, but you can do little things like a separate little weird broken up bit here and there, and your brain actually loves it because your brain starts to look in its computer files, memory files of what happens to reflections when the water's ripply, and somewhere locked in there, if you've seen a picture of you experienced it, it says, oh yes, there's little bits, it's all broken up, it's not as smooth as the subject, and all this information comes to help you understand what you're looking at. I'm going to leave it at that because, first of all, I feel like when I look at it, the stones are still my key element that I look at. I could work up the contrast or the strength of the colours in here. I'll show you this. This is an acrylic painting that I did, and it's the same sort of situation here as what's happening here, but can you see if I made it that intense, or not even that intense, it would dominate, and then there's this visual confusion over, well, what am I looking at, what's the subject? And with watercolour, I just like to have it clear, and then everything else is supporting. Okay, thanks for watching, guys, and please leave a comment or give me some feedback, and I'll see you next week. Have a lovely creative week. Bye.